Welcome to Tales of Bygone Years, where the echoes of history still whisper through time. In this episode, you will hear the story of a ship that was meant to change the world, but instead became a symbol of human pride and eternal memory. Join us as we descend beneath the waves to uncover what truly happened that night. Aboard the Titanic, the voices from the deep still call. This is only the beginning. Titanic, voices from the deep. I remember the sound before I remember the sight. It was 1909 in Belfast, and the first steel plates of hull number 401 rang under the hammers of riveters. The yard smelled of oil, coal smoke, and wet iron. To others, it might have looked like chaos. Sparks flying, cranes moving, men shouting. But to me, it was the beginning of order. Every beam, every frame had its place on the plan I carried rolled beneath my arm. We called the ship Titanic. To the newspapers, Titanic was unsinkable, though I never used that word. To me, Titanic was numbers and drawings, 16 watertight compartments, a double-bottomed hull, engines that could carry the vessel steadily across the Atlantic. Still, I admit, even I felt something more when I stood at the foot of the bow. Titanic was immense, 882 feet, nearly a quarter of a mile. The sunlight glanced off the plates as if the steel itself carried pride. For nearly 3 years, I walked Titanic's decks before anyone else set foot upon them. I saw the first-class lounge take shape with its carved oak panels, the grand staircase with its iron balustrade. I watched plasterers finish ceilings in the second class, and painters brighten the dormitories of the third. Titanic was not only for the rich, though the ship would carry them in comfort unmatched at sea. Titanic was also for emigrants who dreamed of America, families who saved for years to buy a single ticket. I often thought, this ship carries not only wealth, but hope. On May 31st, 1911, we launched Titanic. Over 100,000 people came to the yard. The ship slid down the slipway, a black giant taking water for the first time. I stood beside my colleagues and felt something that was both pride and responsibility. Pride because we had built the largest moving object in the world. Responsibility because 2,000 souls would one day trust their lives to Titanic. For the next year, the ship was fitted out. Carpets were laid, chandeliers hung, brass polished until it shone. Every day I walked with my pencil and notebook, marking adjustments. A shelf lowered here, a wall moved there. A ship is never just steel. It is 1,000 decisions, each carrying a human face. The hand that will touch this rail, the child that will climb these stairs. In April 1912, Titanic was ready. We took the vessel to sea trials in Belfast Lock. The engines ran smooth, the helm answered, the compasses steady. Titanic passed every test. I wrote the final notes and signed my name, though in truth, I felt it was Titanic that signed herself. The ship moved with a weight and grace I had never seen before. When Titanic left for Southampton, the world called the ship the safest liner afloat. Some whispered Titanic was more than a ship, that it was proof of what men could do in this new century. But I knew better. Titanic was not invincible. Titanic was strong, yes, but still a creation of steel, rivets, and human hands. And yet, as I watched Titanic steam toward the first voyage, I felt a strange chill. Not fear exactly, but the sense that once Titanic left Belfast, the ship no longer belonged to us who built it. From that moment, Titanic belonged to history. Southampton was alive with movement when Titanic arrived in early April 1912. The docks smelled of salt and coal dust, crowded with porters, carriages, and carts stacked high with luggage. Families gathered, some tearful, some proud, waving to those who would soon sail. Titanic lay moored like a steel city at rest, her 4 funnels towering above warehouses and chimneys. To many who had never seen such a vessel, the sight was overwhelming. I walked her decks quietly, making my notes. Carpets stretched fresh in the first-class corridors. Brass gleamed, and glass domes let sunlight pour into the great staircase. The kitchens were stocked, pantries filled with crates of fruit, barrels of meat, and over 40,000 eggs. The scale of it all was immense, yet precise, each item listed and counted. As chief designer, I had a habit of noticing details others might miss. A door that creaked, a chair placed too close to a wall, a light fitting not aligned. Small things, but to me they mattered. On the quay, the contrast of passengers told its own story. Wealthy families arrived by motorcar, dressed in fine coats and hats, greeted by stewards who carried their trunks. In another corner, emigrants waited in long lines, clutching bundles, tickets folded carefully in hand. They came from Ireland, from Scandinavia, from Italy, drawn by the promise of America. I often looked at their faces and thought, Titanic holds their future in her steel. The crew assembled in numbers that seemed endless. Nearly 900 men and women, from sailors and stokers to cooks, waiters and maids, prepared for duty. Orders were given, watches assigned. Wireless operators set up their cabin, tuning the Marconi set that would connect Titanic with the world beyond the horizon. In the engine rooms below, firemen loaded coal into the great bunkers, ready to feed the boilers for the first leg of the journey. There were inspections, too. Officials from the Board of Trade walked the ship, counting lifeboats, checking charts, testing compasses. 20 lifeboats stood along the boat deck, their white hulls gleaming in the sun. They met the law, though not the need. The regulation was based on tonnage, not people. As I watched them swing in their davits, I could not help but wonder if someday that rule would prove too narrow. I, as the chief designer, felt the weight of every glance at the ship. Passengers saw luxury, officials saw compliance, but I saw responsibility. Every rail, every bolt, every rivet passed through my mind as though the ship were speaking to me, reminding me of the thousands of choices that had built her. And now those choices would be tested by the sea. April 10th arrived clear and cold. Crowds pressed at the dockside, waving handkerchiefs, calling names, straining for a last glimpse. Bands played, whistles blew, and the air filled with excitement and farewell. Titanic's ropes were cast off, tugboats pulled her gently from the quay, and the journey began. As I stood at the rail, I felt pride, yes, but also a strange unease. For all her strength, Titanic was still at the mercy of the ocean. And as the quay slipped away behind us, I realized that the ship's story was no longer ours to build. It had already begun. Once Titanic left Southampton, the ship began to reveal its true character, not only through steel and engines, but through the lives of those who filled her decks. More than 2,000 souls had come aboard, each carrying a story, a hope, or a secret. Together, they formed a floating world, divided by class but joined by the same sea. First class shone with quiet confidence. Wealthy families and famous names walked the polished corridors, their footsteps softened by carpets imported from Brussels. In the dining saloon, chandeliers glittered over white linen tables. Gentlemen in tailored suits spoke of business and politics, while ladies admired new Paris fashions. Children played by the railings, watched over by nannies in crisp uniforms. For them, Titanic was not a ship but a palace at sea. Second class offered dignity and comfort. Clerks, teachers, ministers, and their families found themselves in cabins finer than many hotels on land. They strolled along their own deck, visited the library, or gathered in the lounge where music filled the evenings. Here, ambition and respectability mixed. Some dreamed of moving upward, some were simply content with steady passage. In third class, life was simpler, but no less filled with hope. Entire families from Ireland, Scandinavia, and Southern Europe crowded into bright dormitories. They brought trunks, bundles, and photographs of the homes they had left behind. Meals were plain but hearty, served in clean dining saloons where laughter and singing often replaced formality. For many, Titanic was the first step toward America, a land they had only imagined. The separation of classes was clear, yet the sea bound everyone together. The same salt wind touched the faces of millionaires and emigrants alike. The same engines carried them forward, the same Atlantic stretched ahead. As I walked through the ship, I sometimes paused to watch them, A young couple standing hand in hand on the boat deck, a child pressing her nose to the glass of the grand staircase, a group of steerage boys chasing each other near the rail. Each scene was ordinary, and yet, in the glow of Titanic's newness, each felt extraordinary. It was easy, in those early days, to believe the journey would go on forever. The ship was steady, the sea calm, and life aboard settled into rhythm. The passengers laughed, dined, and dreamed, unaware that history itself had chosen to sail with them. By the second day at sea, Titanic felt alive in every corridor. The vibration of her engines became a steady heartbeat, a rhythm that passengers soon stopped noticing. The ocean stretched endless and calm, a sheet of dark blue beneath a pale April sky. Each sunrise painted the decks gold. Each evening, the lights of the ship shimmered like a floating city against the horizon. Titanic had already left behind the coast of Ireland and now moved westward through the open Atlantic. The cold air carried a taste of salt and distance. To some, it was freedom, to others, mystery. But for most, it was comfort. The weather was perfect, the sea gentle, and the ship steady as land. Crewmen joked that even the gulls seemed to follow her just to admire. Life aboard had settled into its rhythm. In the mornings, the decks filled with people walking in slow circles for exercise. The first-class promenade gleamed with polished teak, where ladies strolled beneath blankets carried by stewards and men leaned on rails, smoking cigars and speaking of stocks, ships, and the modern world. In the afternoons, tea was served with music from the ship's orchestra. By evening, the grand dining saloon filled with conversation and laughter. The sound of clinking glasses mixed with the low hum of the engines far below. Below the luxury, the heart of the ship worked without pause. More than 150 stokers and firemen fed coal into the furnaces day and night, their faces blackened, their muscles slick with sweat despite the chill above. In the kitchens, cooks moved quickly, serving thousands of meals each day. Messages clicked through the Marconi room, connecting Titanic to other ships and to the distant world of land. Each man and woman had their task, and the great machine moved as one body. For the passengers, the voyage seemed timeless. Children chased each other near the railings, their laughter echoing over the sea. Couples walked arm in arm under the cold stars. In third class, fiddles played lively tunes as people danced, their voices blending with the hum of the engines. In second class, someone read aloud from a novel, while others played chess or watched the sea through round portholes. Everywhere there was a feeling of safety, the belief that nothing could disturb this perfection. I often stood at the rail at night, watching the ship's lights reflect on the dark surface of the ocean. The air was colder here, far north, but the stars were bright, scattered like fire across the sky. From this height, Titanic's four funnels glowed faintly in the starlight, her decks calm and ordered. Looking down, I could see the faint white foam curling from her bow, marking the path west. Steady, certain, unstoppable. Some passengers said the ship was too large, too quiet, too perfect. But I knew the stillness well. It was the calm heartbeat of creation before the test. The sea was waiting, silent and patient. And somewhere ahead, beyond that glittering horizon, the Atlantic kept its own secrets. By the fourth day at sea, the calm had turned almost eerie. The Atlantic stretched flat and silver under a pale sun, the air sharp with cold though the wind was still. Passengers wrapped in coats admired the glassy surface, unaware that this stillness carried its own kind of danger. In the wireless room, the operators were busy. Dozens of messages crossed the air, greetings, business notes, social chatter from ship to shore. Mixed among them came the first warnings. Reports of ice ahead, drifting south from the Grand Banks of Newfoundland. One after another, ships nearby, the Coronia, Baltic, America, and Californian, sent their positions and advice. Large ice fields, growlers, and bergs in your path. Each report was logged and forwarded to the bridge. Captain Smith read them carefully, his calm face showing no sign of worry. Ice was common in April. Titanic was fast but cautious, following her course slightly southward. I spoke with him that afternoon in the chart room. We looked over the map, a wide stretch of ocean, dotted with pencil marks where ice had been sighted. "We'll pass safely well before nightfall," he said quietly. "Still, we'll keep the lookouts sharp." His voice carried the calm confidence of experience. Above, on the forward deck, the lookouts scanned the horizon through the biting wind. At night, they would stand in the open, eyes watering from the cold, watching for the faint white glow of ice against the stars. No binoculars had been issued, a simple oversight, the key to the locker misplaced before sailing. No one thought it mattered. The air was clear, visibility perfect. Passengers knew nothing of the warnings. They continued to live their voyage. Dinners, music, laughter. The orchestra played light waltzes in the first-class lounge. Children rolled hoops along the promenade. Couples posed for photographs on deck. The mood was cheerful, as if the Atlantic itself had agreed to stay calm for their journey. Yet as night approached, the temperature dropped further. The wind sharpened, breath turned to mist, and a thin frost began to gather on the railings. I walked along the deck and felt it under my hand. A coldness deeper than before, dry and absolute. The sea was so still it looked like polished glass. The engines hummed softly, the only sound for miles. I paused near the bow and listened. The sky above was clear, filled with stars so bright they reflected off the ocean like a mirror. In that silence, the ship seemed unreal, too vast, too perfect, too sure of herself. I turned toward the bridge, where officers stood watch. The lights were steady, their figures calm. Everything looked exactly as it should. But somewhere ahead, in that dark and frozen world, the ice waited, and the wireless keys kept clicking, sending out the same message again and again. "Ice reported in your path." April 14th, 1912. The day had been calm, colder than before. The sky a cloudless dome from morning to night. By evening, the sea was like glass. Not a ripple, not a whisper of wind. The stars seemed close enough to touch, shining with unnatural brilliance. Some passengers called it the most beautiful night they had ever seen. At 10 p.m., the temperature dropped below freezing. Frost gathered on the railings, and a thin mist clung to the lower decks. From the bridge came quiet orders. Maintain course, maintain speed, 21 knots. Captain Smith had retired to his cabin, leaving Second Officer Lightoller and then First Officer Murdoch in command. Titanic moved forward with perfect rhythm, her engines steady, her lights glowing softly across the calm water. On the forward lookout post, two men kept watch, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee. They stood in the open, their eyes burning from the cold, scanning the darkness. Without binoculars, they relied only on sight. The air was so clear that the horizon seemed endless, but that same clarity hid dangers. Icebergs were harder to see under a star-filled sky than in fog. At 11:40 p.m., Fleet leaned forward suddenly. Ahead, barely visible against the dark, was a shadow, tall, silent, almost black. He blinked, uncertain. Then moonlight caught it, a pale edge of ice rising straight from the water. His heart jumped. Iceberg, right ahead. The bell rang 3 times. Murdoch reacted instantly. "Hard a starboard," he ordered. The helm spun, engines reversed, but momentum fought back. 46,000 tons of steel against time and distance. The ship began to turn, slowly, painfully, her bow swinging left. For a moment it seemed they might clear it. Then came the sound, a low, tearing groan, like the earth itself had shifted. Along the starboard side, ice scraped the hull for 7 seconds. No great crash, no explosion, only a shudder, a deep vibration that ran through every deck. On the promenade, passengers felt it beneath their feet and glanced around, confused. A few laughed, thinking the ship had struck a wave, but the sea was flat as glass. I was in my cabin when it came. That strange sound, that sudden stillness. I felt the change in the vibration of the engines, the faint list underfoot. Within minutes, an officer knocked at my door. "We've hit something, sir. Captain requests your presence." I went to the bridge. The night was deadly quiet. Murdoch stood pale, his cap pushed back, eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. The iceberg was already fading astern, a white ghost under the stars. Captain Smith arrived moments later. "What have we struck?" he asked. "Iceberg, sir," Murdoch replied. Smith gave no order for panic. He turned to me. "Mr. Andrews, will you inspect the damage?" I nodded and left without a word. Below decks, the truth was already clear. Water was rising in the forward holds, hissing and rushing through seams of torn steel. 5 compartments were flooding, one more than the ship could survive. As I traced the lines on the blueprint in my mind, a single thought took shape. She will not stay afloat. Above us, the music still played. On deck, the stars burned cold. Titanic sailed on, unaware that her fate had already begun. First, there was no fear, only questions. Titanic moved on through the cold night as if nothing had happened. The engine slowed, then stopped, leaving a strange silence that spread through the decks. It was a silence so deep that passengers could hear the sea lapping gently against the hull, a sound most had never noticed before. In the corridors, doors opened. People stepped out in dressing gowns, curious. "Did we stop for the night?" someone asked. Others laughed softly, thinking the ship had lost a propeller or struck a small floe. The air was calm, the lights still bright. No one imagined danger. On the bridge, Captain Smith stood pale, his jaw tight. Reports came in quickly from below. Flooding in the mailroom, in cargo hold number 3, and forward in the boiler rooms. I joined him with my notebook, and together we went down to inspect. The air grew colder as we descended. In the mail hold, water rushed in knee-deep. Sacks of letters floated past like pale ghosts. Farther forward, men worked desperately to close the watertight doors, the metal slamming shut one by one. But water was already spilling over the tops of the bulkheads. The list of compartments ran through my mind. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I knew the line of survival. Titanic could stay afloat with any 4 flooded, but not 5. I didn't speak immediately. Instead, I bent down, watching the water creep across the floor, fast and relentless. Then I turned to the captain. "She will sink," I said quietly. Smith stared at me, his face unreadable. "You're certain?" I nodded. "Mathematically certain." For a long moment, no one spoke. The sound of water filled the silence. Steady, rising, unstoppable. Then the captain straightened. "Very well. Prepare the lifeboats. Andrews, estimate the time." "An hour and a half, maybe 2, I replied. He closed his eyes briefly. "God help us." Above, passengers still wandered the decks. Some pointed at bits of ice scattered along the starboard side, souvenirs from the berg. A few young men kicked the chunks across the planks, laughing. In the first-class lounge, the orchestra played on light tunes to calm the air. The stewardesses reassured everyone. Just a precaution, nothing to worry about. But below, the bow was already heavy. The tilt was small, only a few degrees, but enough to make marbles roll across the floor and doors swing shut on their own. The great ship that had been so steady now seemed to breathe uneasily, her balance shifting with every minute. In the boiler rooms, firemen worked waist-deep in freezing water to keep the lights burning. One shouted through the noise, "She's taking it fast, sir." Another man crossed himself and kept shoveling coal. They all knew, though none would say it. This ship was dying, slowly, quietly, beautifully. I went back up toward the bridge. The stars still shone, the sea still calm. But somewhere deep within, Titanic had already begun to surrender to the Atlantic. By midnight, the calm had turned uneasy. Titanic now carried a slight forward tilt. The promenade deck slanted just enough for a marble to roll on its own. The sound of pumps echoed faintly through the hull, a dull rhythm, steady, hopeless. Officers moved quickly, voices low but firm, while stewards went cabin to cabin, waking passengers and asking them to dress warmly and come on deck. "Just a precaution," they said. "Captain's orders." Many passengers smiled politely and returned to packing their trunks or sipping brandy. Some refused to leave their beds. The ship was still lit, still warm, still steady. How could such a vessel sink? On the boat deck, crewmen uncovered the lifeboats for the first time. Frost sparkled on the ropes. The order was given: women and children first. The first boats were only half filled. Few believed the ship was in real danger. Some women hesitated to leave their husbands. Others protested that they would rather wait until morning. One officer raised his voice. "There's no time for arguments." But the calm sea below gave no sign of urgency. I moved along the deck, noting the angle, the cold air biting my face. The lights flickered slightly as the dynamos strained. Captain Smith stood near the bridge, his beard silver in the pale glow. He gave quiet instructions, almost in whispers, refusing to show fear. The first lifeboat, number 7, was lowered at 12:40 a.m. It swung gently in the still air, ropes creaking as it descended toward the dark water below. The splash echoed like a heartbeat. Above, the ship's band began to play. At first, it was lively music, cheerful waltzes and ragtime tunes. Some passengers clapped softly, thinking it was meant to calm nerves. But as the minutes passed, the melodies slowed, turning solemn. The sound carried far across the sea, clear and fragile. Below decks, crewmen struggled to keep the lights running. Water had reached deeper compartments. The hum of the turbines faltered, then steadied again. In the boiler rooms, men worked in silence, understanding the truth but refusing to stop. The power they kept alive was the only light left to thousands above. On deck, I passed a young couple holding hands tightly. The woman's eyes were wide, reflecting the glow of the lamps. "Is it true?" she whispered. "Are we really sinking?" I hesitated, then said quietly, "Yes, but you'll be safe. Go now." They nodded, stepped into a lifeboat, and vanished slowly downward, their faces lit by the ship's lanterns. Around them, the vast night remained motionless, the ocean calm as glass. As the band played on, I looked across the black water. The stars were motionless, cold and perfect. Against that silence, the creak of ropes, the orders shouted in the wind, and the faint strains of music. It all felt distant, unreal. For a moment, I thought of Belfast, of the shipyard, of the first day the Titanic touched water. I had believed we built something that would last forever. Now, standing beneath the stars, I realized forever was never ours to decide. By 1:30 a.m., the deck was no longer level. The bow had sunk deep into the dark water, while the stern lifted slowly, almost gracefully, against the stars. The sea was black and endless, the horizon lost in shadow. The air was colder now, sharp, biting, the kind that cut through even the thickest coat. Everywhere, movement. Men untied ropes, officers shouted orders, women wept softly as the next lifeboats went down. The sound of oars faded into the distance, leaving behind only the creak of metal and the murmur of frightened voices. The band still played, their instruments trembling in frozen hands. They had moved to the open deck now, standing near the grand staircase entrance, lit by the dim glow of lanterns. I passed them as they began another piece, slower this time. "Nearer, my God, to thee." The notes rose above the chaos, fragile and pure. Around them, people paused, listening. Some prayed quietly, others simply stared into the night. The music seemed to hold the ship together, if only for a few minutes more. On the bridge, Captain Smith gave his last orders. "Abandon ship, every man for himself." His voice broke once, barely audible. Then he stepped back into the wheelhouse, disappearing into the shadows. No one saw him again. Below decks, the water roared. The pumps were drowned. The boilers hissed one last time, and the power flickered. Lights dimmed, brightened, then dimmed again. I felt the ship tremble, a deep, slow vibration, like a final breath. I made my way to the boat deck. The last lifeboats were gone. Only collapsible rafts remained, half frozen, barely usable. Officers tried to free them with axes. Nearby, a group of men stood silently, realizing there was nowhere left to go. The sea was too cold, too vast, too final. A steward offered me a life belt. I took it but knew it would make little difference. The water was near freezing, death within minutes. I looked around. The once proud decks now tilted steeply, the railings slick with ice. Passengers clung to whatever they could. Pipes, benches, each other. At 2:10 a.m., the lights flickered one last time. Then, for the first time since leaving Southampton, Titanic went dark. The stars alone remained, and the sound of the ocean rising around us. The great ship groaned, a low, haunting sound, and the bow slipped beneath the surface. The stern lifted higher, propellers glinting in the starlight. People screamed, prayed, leapt, fell. The music stopped mid-note. And then, with a terrible roar, the ship broke apart. I felt the deck give way beneath me. A rush of air, the sound of tearing steel, and then water. Freezing, black, endless. And in that moment, there was no noise, no light, only the deep voice of the Atlantic closing over what once had been the mightiest ship in the world. When the last cry faded, only the sea remained. The Atlantic stretched endlessly under the starlight, calm and cruel, as if nothing had happened. But the stillness was not peace. It was grief in its purest form. The water that once carried laughter, music, and pride now carried silence. Fragments of dreams floated on the surface. A child's toy, a hat, a book, a single shoe turning slowly in the current. The night was dark, but it was no longer empty. Above that cold, black mirror drifted the lifeboats, scattered, fragile, and far apart. In each one, men and women sat huddled together, wrapped in blankets that could not stop the cold. The air cut like glass. Frost gathered on faces and eyelashes. Some whispered prayers, others stared into the distance, too numb to speak. The ocean was so still that every sob, every creak of the oars echoed for miles. Time lost its meaning. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. No one knew. The survivors kept their eyes on the horizon, waiting for something, anything, to appear. Some boats tried to row back toward the faint lights they had seen, but those lights were gone. The Titanic had vanished completely. Then, around 4 a.m, a faint glow appeared far away, a promise of rescue. The RMS Carpathia was coming. As she drew nearer, rockets lit the sky again, this time not for warning but for hope. The sea shimmered faintly in their reflection, revealing faces turned upward, pale and tear-streaked. Hands waved weakly. Voices called out hoarsely through the fog. When the first survivors were pulled aboard, silence met them. The crew of the Carpathia did not cheer. They simply helped, gently and quickly. Blankets, warm drinks, trembling hands. Mothers clutching children who no longer moved. Husbands scanning every face, searching for someone they would never see again. The deck of the rescue ship became a floating city of grief. People stared at the black horizon, unwilling to believe that the great ship was gone. Some whispered that they had heard music even after the lights went out, the faint sound of a violin carried by the wind. By dawn, the ocean looked almost peaceful. The waves rolled softly under a pale sky, and the rising sun painted the clouds in gold. But beneath that fragile beauty lay a grave. 2 miles down, in darkness that sunlight would never reach, rested what was once called unsinkable. The sea had claimed it but not erased it. Because some tragedies never disappear, they simply sink deeper into memory. More than a century has passed since that night, yet the ocean remembers everything. Beneath 2 miles of water lies what was once the grandest ship ever built, the Titanic, now resting in silence. Her hull, once bright and proud, is now veiled in rust and darkness. Her lights have gone out, but her story still burns. Divers who descend into the deep say the wreck feels alive, not in body, but in presence. The silence there is not empty. It hums faintly, as if the sea itself still holds the heartbeat of that night. The chandeliers lie shattered, the dining hall draped in silt, but the spirit of the ship remains, solemn, patient, eternal. Over the decades, expeditions have sent cameras and lights into the darkness, trying to uncover what the ocean has kept hidden. Each time, new images return, shoes lying side by side, a porcelain cup unbroken, a doorway opening into nothingness. They are fragments of lives, frozen in time. And yet, despite all the exploration, no one truly finds the Titanic. Because the ship is no longer just steel and rivets. It has become a memory shared by the world. A reminder of human brilliance and of how fragile that brilliance can be. When people speak of the Titanic, they speak not only of tragedy, but of humanity. Of the courage shown by those who helped others before themselves. Of the band that played until the end. Of engineers who stayed below to keep the lights burning for as long as they could. These are not myths. They are truths carved into the soul of history. The Titanic is no longer a ship. She is a symbol. A story of ambition and loss, of faith and humility. She reminds us that even the mightiest creations of human hands are powerless against nature, time, and fate. But she also reminds us of something greater, that in the darkest hours, compassion shines brighter than any light. The ocean has kept her secret well, but not forever. Each visit, each photograph, each word spoken about her is another breath given back to memory. And so she lives, not in the steel that rusts, but in the hearts of those who remember. When the waves are calm and the stars are clear, it's said that the sea still carries a faint sound, a whisper, deep and distant. Some call it the wind. Others say it's the echo of that night, the voice of the Titanic, still speaking softly from the deep.